Hello and welcome to this lesson on scientific questions and how to formulate them. Let's take a moment and look at this picture. We have a butterfly on top of the flower. What types of questions could we ask? Do you think this butterfly is a pretty butterfly? Do you think that maybe this flower could be a food source for the butterfly? Or maybe important in the reproduction of the butterfly? Or maybe in the reproduction of the flower? There's lots of different questions that you can ask about the natural world. Dozens, hundreds of questions. Some of them are scientific in nature. Others don't fit that format. So let's take a moment in the warm-up to see what you remember about scientific questions. Greetings, class. This is Mr. Morales with today's science lesson on hypotheses, theories, and laws. Look at this picture here. Here we see a couple of research scientists discussing some data that they see on their computer. This discussion and others like it lead to questions that ultimately become hypotheses. With research and experimenting, those hypotheses may become theories or laws. In this lesson, you'll learn about the roles of hypotheses, theories, and laws in science. Remember that questions, hypotheses, and experiments are all steps that scientists routinely perform. Before getting started with this lesson, think back to all of the steps that scientists perform when investigating a question that they have about the natural world.
Hello, I'll be your lab instructor for today's lab. Today's lab is on measurement. Take a look at the screen. There's a bunch of sports equipment. How would you describe that sports equipment? Would you say it's a bowling ball, a baseball? What if you were asked to describe it to somebody that had never seen a sport or never used that sports equipment? Would you then use the coloration, like a black and white soccer ball? Well, scientists actually have to use specific methods to describe substances. One of those methods is measurement. The reason they use measurement is because they can standardize measurements, and other scientists then can use those same measurements and those same protocols. Let me give you another example. What if I was to put a marble in that same set? How would you describe the marble? It's no longer a piece of sports equipment. Would you then measure the mass? Measure the size? How would you measure the size? Well, by the end of this lab, you're going to be able to answer that question. But before we do that, we're going to be reviewing what you already know about measurements.
Hi, I'm Dr. Cool. Today, we are going to talk about what you're made of and what makes you tick. The short, very general answer to that question is macromolecules. There are four major classes of macromolecules that are structured differently and function differently. And before we get started, I'd like you to take a couple of minutes to give some thought to that topic. Hi, I'm Dr. Cool. The topic for this lesson is catalysts. Catalysts are substances that allow a chemical reaction to happen faster. And at this moment, like at every moment, there are trillions of chemical reactions going on in your body. Take a look at these two pictures. Imagine that you're on one side of the mountain and you want to get to the other side. You can take the long, winding road that switches back and forth, both up to the top and down the other side, or you can shoot through the tunnel. What catalysts do is let your chemical reactions shoot through the tunnel.
Welcome, class. I'm Mr. Morales with today's science lesson on cell theory. Look at this image in front of you. This image is the skin cells of a mouse.
it was taken with a laser scanning microscope. Without powerful microscopes like this one that were used to take this image, scientists would never have been able to learn that life forms are made of individual units called cells. This idea about life being made up of individual units called cells is a concept called cell theory. Before we discuss cell theory in detail, let's recall what you know about cells.
Hello everyone, my name is Mr. Tamer and I want to welcome you to this lesson on the function of organelles. To start off, I'd like you to think about a factory. A factory without workers, or power, or even walls. Each of these parts of the factory serves a purpose to produce a product that you can deliver to customers. The cells of your body function much like this factory. Your cells have parts called organelles, which help the cell to live and function properly. Hello, my name is Mr. Tamer, and I want to welcome you to this lesson on plant and animal cells. Let's begin by taking a look at this picture of a hand and the leaf that it's holding. Are they made out of the same things? They have the same texture, the same substances? Both the hand and the leaf are made out of cells. Cells are the smallest unit of both plants and animals. Let's take a look at the definition of a cell.
Greetings, class. I'm Mr. Morales with today's science lesson, which is on homeostasis. Look at the two gentlemen in the pictures you see in front of you. One is standing what looks like in the rain, and he appears to be clutching his arms as though he's shivering. The other looks like he just completed maybe a long run. He must be very hot as he is covered in sweat. When our bodies react to extreme conditions, such as the gentleman in the cold, we begin to shiver, which is a way for our bodies to heat themselves up when they feel chilly. When we are very, very hot, after doing maybe a long run or a marathon, we begin to sweat. Our bodies sweat to help us cool our bodies down. These are just a couple of ways that our bodies maintain a fairly constant temperature within, around 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Today's lesson is about homeostasis, how the cells in our bodies do the same thing when the conditions outside of the cell change. Let's see what you already know about homeostasis.
Hello, my name is Mr. Tamer, and I'll welcome you to this lesson on ATP, adenosine triphosphate. As we begin, let's consider a bunch of different organisms. Maybe some that you see in this picture here of the zebra, the giraffe, and the savanna that they live in. You see plants and you see animals. As different as these organisms are, they both use energy in the form of ATP. This lesson is going to focus on how cells get and use the energy in adenosine triphosphate. As we move forward, I want you to think about how organisms as different as plants and animals get their food and how they use it.
Have you ever seen an alligator that looks like this one? His skin color is actually caused by a mutation in the alligator's DNA that causes an error in the production of melanin, which is a pigment for skin color. Since there's a mutation in the DNA for melanin, this alligator ends up with very, very pale skin. Before we talk about mutations in DNA, we're going to review a little bit what you already know about DNA.
Hello and welcome to this lesson on photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Let's begin by considering this picture in front of you. We have one producer and one consumer. Do you know which is which? Our producer is the leaf that belongs to a plant which captures energy from the sun and transforms it into a usable form that the plant can survive and live off of. The consumer is the caterpillar, who gets its energy by consuming the leaf. What do these two processes have in common? They both transform energy from one form to another.
Before we get started, let's review which organisms are producers and which are consumers.
Greetings, class. I'm Mr. Morales with today's science lesson on mitosis. Mitosis. We're going to learn about the steps of mitosis. Mitosis is the process cells go through to reproduce, and it occurs in multicellular organisms such as the man, the plant, the trees, the bugs, and all of the things, all the living things that you see in this picture. Before we get started, let's review the examples of multicellular organisms. Welcome, class. I'm Mr. Morales with today's science lesson on the cell cycle. Look at the woman in the photo here. Did you know that this woman is losing between 30,000 and 40,000 skin cells every minute? How do you think she has any skin cells left with this decline, with this loss? Well, actually, what's going on is the skin cells she is losing are dead skin cells at the very top of her layer of skin. Cells reproduce extremely rapidly to keep up with this tremendous rate of loss. Even more impressive, inside your body, in your intestines, millions of new cells are being generated every second. All living organisms, plants, animals, including humans, all need to have cells growing and reproducing constantly. What we're going to look at today is the cell cycle.
Take a good look at this picture. What do these people all have in common? Well, among other things, they all have 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth, and 2 arms. So people look very similar to each other, but they also look very different. What can account for these differences? Well, that's a very good question, and the answer is a biological term known as meiosis. In this lesson, we'll investigate how meiosis operates to generate such variation and diversity in living things, especially humans. But first, let's see what you remember about cellular production, growth, and replacement. Now let's review what we've learned about meiosis and how variation and sexual reproduction varies amongst certain organisms.
Greetings. This is Mr. Morales with today's science lesson on analyzing evidence. Look at the picture. You see a young gentleman thinking? Are you ever confused when you hear people making conflicting statements about the same topic? Do you ever wonder, how do you tell who's the one who's correct? This lesson is about how to analyze evidence to determine if it is valid and if it should be accepted. To get started, let's remember that evidence must be observation-based, and that you must be able to tell the difference between an observation and an opinion. In the next activity, you'll see if you can do that.
Hello and welcome to this lesson on cellular respiration. As we begin, I'd like you to consider this picture that we see. Cycling requires a lot of energy, but where does that energy come from? That's the focus of this lesson. We're going to take a look at cellular respiration and how it provides us with the energy that we in all cellular life need to live. But before we get into that, let's take a look at what types of activities require energy.